The time has come to prove my mettle. That's a word, isn't it? Mettle? Person's ability to cope well with difficulties or to face a demanding situation in a spirited and resilient way. Well, by golly, that's what I'm going to do. Last two videos I published, I've had some hate. It would be ironic if this is the thing that led to my cancellation. And not my side hustle selling emotional support rocks and live tweeting my dreams. Actually, drop a comment to guess what is going to be the cause of my cancellation. Anyway, so I have been reanalyzing these data from this COVID-19 vaccination intentions paper. And because the eyes of scrutiny, Mr. Scrutiny, are upon me, this is taking a lot of time. Because I'm trying to be super careful, and then in the end, I ended up kind of rushing the end, so who knows. This might be a little bit messy, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to my R screen and show you what I did, and show you why the conclusions the authors came to were kind of good, but they could be improved. So let's look at that. Actually, before I step in R, let me tell you what I tried to do. So we have a mixed model data set with lots and lots of predictor variables. And my normal go-to thing to do when I have a data set with lots and lots of predictor variables is to do random forests and basically try to figure out which variables are the most predictive and use it to identify any possible nonlinear relationships or interaction effects. Problem is, we have repeated measures, and random forest doesn't handle repeated measures so well. And so historically, how I've handled that is I have averaged within cluster and then done random forest on the clusters. So I do that, and then once I find the top predictors, then I start using mixed models. And I don't like that because like the algorithm to select the variables is different than the algorithm that I use to fit in the end. And so there's bound to be some differences between what the random forest algorithm finds versus what the mixed models show. And so I started looking at different algorithms that can combine random forest with mixed models, and I found something called MERF from the Longitude-RF package. I'll leave a link in the description. And so it seems to do what I want it to do. So I'm going to show you that first. Well, I'm actually not, because it like takes forever. This is a big data set that I'm working with. It's like 5,000 observations, and random forest takes a long time. Oh, and mixed models take a long time relative to a regular linear model. So when you combine those things together, it actually took like 10-15 minutes to run. But I'll go ahead and show you what I did. And my goal this time around is to not block my code with my head. And I mentioned in my first video, the authors did a fantastic job of documenting everything. So very easy to follow. And so I borrowed a lot of their code, at least the data preparation stuff, and then just rename some variables. And I found out that MERF doesn't like factors, so I had to convert all my factors to numeric. So we've got our outcome variable, and then we got to tell it what the cluster variable is. And then here I'm specifying what my predictor variables are. The Z's. Nope, just kidding. That is my random effects model. So I'm saying that wave is a random effect. And then I create my set of predictors, which is everything left in this model except for the outcome. And then right here, it's commented out because I kept accidentally running it, and it was driving me crazy. But that right there is the syntax. So I'm fitting the random forest model, and then I am computing variable importance, and then I output the results. So this is, and I like to do this, especially with big projects. It gets complicated if everything's in one script, and it drives me crazy. So instead, I separated it out into different scripts. So yeah, when I printed the variable importance, it showed me that these are the top predictors. Remember, we're trying to predict their score on their intentions to vaccinate. And so the best predictor is their attitude towards vaccination in general, which isn't surprising. If you are very positive about vaccines, probably pretty likely you're going to be favorably inclined to get a COVID vaccination. And then we've got flu future, meaning do you plan on getting a flu shot in the future? The degree to which they perceive COVID as threatening, and then whether they got a flu shot last fall, I believe is what that is. Party N, I don't know why the _N is there, but that's just Democrat or Republican. And then ID, and I'm not sure why ID shows up. I'm guessing it's probably saying that It's kind of like an ICC sort of thing. How much of the variance is attributable to cluster level effects? And then we've got age, wave, which is the time point, SES, socioeconomic status, and then strength. But I end up not looking at these other ones because, well, I'll show you why in a minute. So I just started using my recently developed cluster-adjusted scatterplots that are amazing, by the way, and I've made a lot of changes because I found a lot of bugs as I was doing this, which is great. So I'm just going to go through and show you what I found. So this shows the relationship between somebody's general attitude toward vaccination and their intentions to get a COVID shot when it comes out. Now, this was like before the vaccination was developed. And we find this relationship, and we see that the model's not actually doing a very good job. It's missing a lot of this stuff. And I even mentioned here, this looks like an ogive relationship, an ogive or sigmoidal. Same thing, just that it has two different bends and then asymptotes at the top and the bottom, which actually doesn't surprise me because their vaccination scores can only go from 1 to 7, and their COVID intentions can only go to from 1 to 7. So they're going to be bumping their heads on the ceiling, as they say. You can only get so high, so that makes sense that it would be a little ogive. Could be a problem. But we see definitely a very strong relationship, and that makes sense. The more favorably you look upon vaccinations in general, more likely you are to get a COVID vaccination. Now let's look at flu future, or whether you plan on getting flu in the future. Oh, I thought it was a binary outcome, but I guess it's not. It's just like, I guess it's similar to that. Like, on a scale of 1 to 7, how likely are you to get a flu shot in the future? And we see a similar relationship, kind of the sigmoidal thing, but not as bad as the other one. But we certainly see a positive relationship. And I decided to add a cubic relationship. Well, I'll just show you what it looked like without that. I'll show you the default, Lewis. Actually, a better way to do this, I spent like 3 hours trying to debug cluster-adjusted scatter and trying to figure out why it kept giving me a lowest line. And I totally forgot that I have an argument called smooth equals true, and it was the default, which says I'm going to overlay a lowest line. And I forgot that was there. And I was like, why is there always a lowest line here? But now I know. All right, and so anyway, when I saw the lowest line, I saw that it was kind of that ogive sort of shape. Or I'm sorry, not ogive, but it's got two bends in it, kind of a cubic shape. So I decided to look at what that would look like. And so, yeah, we see a fancy relationship. The more you believe you will get a flu vaccine in the future, the more likely you are to get a COVID vaccine. Not surprising at all. And then now we get to COVID, like how threatening you perceive COVID to be. And again, we see a very strong relationship between the two. Fantastic. And it was at this point that I had an insight. I was like, wait a minute, these are all really the same thing, aren't they? So we're talking about your intentions of getting a flu shot in the future, your attitude towards vaccines, how threatening you perceive COVID to be. Like, of course those are going to be related to your intentions to get vaccinated. Duh. If you've gotten vaccinated in the past and you think vaccines work, you're probably going to get a COVID vaccination. If you plan on getting a flu shot in the future, you're probably going to get a COVID vaccination. And so it reminded me of a paper that I'm going to link in the description that I read, actually around the time it came out, 2015-ish, where it made a big impact on me, obviously, because 10 years later, I'm still thinking about that article. And of all things, it was a Vice article talking about how when police are evaluating how much they do racial profiling when they do like traffic stops or whatever, what they end up doing is they end up controlling for a bunch of different things, like the neighborhood or the type of car that they drive and whatever. And in so doing, they try to estimate how much racial profiling there is going on. And this article makes the point that when you start controlling for those things, you end up controlling for the very thing you're trying to study. So if you control for neighborhood and then look at the effect of race, well, race is super highly correlated with neighborhood. And so if you're subtracting out that variance, you're subtracting out one of the primary things involved in somebody's race. And as I thought about it, I realized I don't think it makes sense to include vaccines and flu shots in the model. Or if I do, maybe I could do like a latent variable model where I'm looking at overall vaccination attitudes. But I don't think I want to do that. I want to talk about COVID. But I think COVID threatening is a little bit different. I think that's probably an important variable to look into, because if you remember during the pandemic, there were a lot of people, including the President of the United States, who was saying, it's no big deal. It's nothing more than just a common flu. And so I'm sure that impacted people's intentions to vaccinate. So I decided I wanted to build a model leaving that in. And I ended up doing flu, but again, I think that would just be getting rid of variants that we want to explain, so I don't think that's a good idea. So then I kind of abandoned those variables that are just like basically vaccination variables. And so I looked at this one and found quite a sizable effect. So Democrats on the left, Republicans on the right. Democrats definitely have higher intentions to vaccinate than Republicans across the waves. And actually, the difference gets bigger as you go through. Now, one thing that was a little surprising to me is if you compare this plot to flu, variable importance, the random forest model said flu was more important of a predictor than party, which this plot kind of says the opposite. And there could be a couple reasons for that. The most obvious reason is that random forest looks at all the variables together, and I'm looking at each of these variables just with wave, and so it might be that there's some interaction effect in one of the variables. So it might be that in the context of another variable that party kind of disappears and then flu becomes a better predictor. I don't know. But at this point, I really didn't care, because the whole point of the random forest was really just to give me a list of the most predicted predictors. And I feel like I have what I need at this point. So I started looking at everything together. Not everything, but the important variables together. So we got COVID threatening, which is the one vaccination-related question that I did want to keep, and then wave, and then party. And then we see this, and I made some changes to how things work. So I added a ghost line, and the ghost line I decided to track was for the Democrats at wave 1. So that makes it easier. And so as we move through the waves, what we see is actually kind of interesting, and I would not have expected that. So at wave 1, there was a really strong relationship that if you perceive COVID as super threatening, you're much more likely to get a vaccination. That makes sense. What doesn't make sense to me, and I don't have a good explanation for it yet, maybe I will, is that as COVID progresses, that relationship weakens such that 6 months after COVID starts, there's almost no relationship anymore. You know, one thought that I had at one time was, okay, maybe by 6 months, everybody realizes this is really deadly and everybody just intends to vaccinate. And there's really, like, everybody believes it's threatening, but that's not what we see. We see variability in the x-axis. So that's not it. And actually the mean level of their intentions to vaccinate are about the same. So I actually don't know why that is. But what's also interesting is when we compare it to the Republicans. So the Republicans, like, those lines are pretty parallel throughout the entire thing. Or in other words, the strength of the relationship between how threatening it is and their intentions to vaccinate doesn't really change over time, which I don't know why that is. I don't know why you would see that change in Democrats, but not in Republicans. I don't know. So I think I just decided to look at it a different way here. Is that what I'm doing? Yeah, I just decided to use a line that was different. I don't know that that's particularly helpful. But again, we see that the slope, actually, maybe it is a little bit. Maybe the slope, yeah, I guess the slope may be weakening just a bit over time. So I guess that's happening for both of them. Again, I don't know why. And also, I made a note. Have I found a 3-way interaction in the wild? What? Yeah, those are kind of rare. But I think we have it here, because we see that threatening is interacting with wave. You can see that up here, that as the wave increases, the slope flattens. So that's that 2-way interaction. You can see that COVID threatening is interacting with party, because those slopes aren't parallel. The red line and the black line aren't parallel. So it's interacting there. And wave, is that interacting with party. I don't know that that would be easy to tell from this. Let's see. Yeah, and it is late for me right now, so I don't know that I have the brain power to do that. Let me just see if I can look at it from a different perspective. Yeah, so like I note here, threat is interacting with wave because the slopes on average are flattening as wave increases. Party is interacting with wave. Yeah, because within, well, it depends on the panel. Like right here, it certainly is interacting because those slopes aren't parallel. But they are kind of over here. So they're not interacting here, but they are interacting here, which means the nature of the two-way interaction depends on the level of a third variable. So again, it seems to indicate that we have a three-way interaction. So I decided to actually evaluate that. So we got a full model where we are allowing all two-way interactions between these three variables and the three-way interaction. And I started with a random slope because I didn't know if we actually needed that. And so let's go ahead and look at that. And what do we see here? So we certainly like this person. That's kind of weird. The more threatening they perceive COVID to be, the less likely they are to get vaccinated. That seems weird. Could be a bot because this was an MTurk study. But anyway, it seems like it's not consistent. But if you get rid of those outliers, maybe it is consistent. I don't know. But I decided to test it, so I got a reduced model where I just have wave as a random effect. And if I do that, then AIC is favoring the full model, BIC is favoring the full, so is the base factor, so is the p-value. So everything agrees. Yes, we are going to keep COVID threatening. And the next thing I decided to do was just try to find out if that three-way interaction really needs to be kept. So we already got our full model. I'm just going to create a new reduced model that instead of getting rid of COVID threatening, we're getting rid of the three-way interaction. And if we look at compare.fits and visually compare the two models, we get this plot. And when you look at one of these plots, all you're looking for is differences. Are the lines predicting different things? And like at wave 1, absolutely not. Wave 2, no. Wave 3, no. 4, no. 5, a little bit. 6, a little bit more. So maybe, you know, for the most part, there doesn't seem to be a three-way interaction. But in waves 5 and 6, maybe there's a difference. So I'd say we got a 50-50 shot. I don't know. Actually, I do know because I've run this before. But if we look at the AIC, it is favoring the reduced model. BIC is favoring the reduced, so is the base factor. P-value is favoring the full model. So it is a little bit ambiguous. Everything but the p-value agrees that we should settle on the reduced model. And I decided, well, as much as I would love to keep a three-way interaction that I found in the wild, I'm going to get rid of it. And that was entirely sarcastic because three-way interactions make things difficult. But that's okay. All right. So now my final model has now become my reduced model. And if we visualize it, I just want to look at the residuals and make sure that everything looks good. The histogram of the residuals looks fairly normal. We got a little bit of probably an outlier or two over here on the left side, but nothing to worry about, especially with this large of a sample size. And then we got the residual dependence plot that looks like a diamond. That's pretty cool. So normally you don't want to see patterns, but this sort of thing is very common when you have Likert scale sort of data, when there's a ceiling and a floor, that you end up getting this banding effect going on. And similar to the SL plot, there's slight heteroscedasticity, but not enough to worry about. So it looks like we've got a good model. And there is the summary, and I'm not going to bother going into this because it's really hard to interpret the individual coefficients just because there's so many interactions going on here that it's better to just look at the visual, which we already did. I'll go ahead and look at that again. So let's do a preliminary interpretation because there's one other thing that I want to do. So we see that generally there is a relationship between how threatening you perceive COVID to be and your intentions to get vaccinated. However, that relationship weakens, but just for Democrats. I don't know why. Republicans, on the other hand, that relationship is the same no matter what wave you're in. And notice that overall that Republicans have lower intentions to vaccinate. And they actually seem completely unresponsive to time. Like that relationship essentially stays the exact same throughout time. And you know what? I think I want to look at this differently. So this is putting wave in panels, but maybe it might be a good idea to look at wave on the x-axis. Oops, so I'll put wave there and threatening there. Oh, and I need to put plus COVID threatening. Whew! Y'all hear that wind? It is windy here. I hear garbage cans being knocked over outside. Yay. All right, so here's another way to look at it. So this looks at the wave. And actually, I don't need to do 6 bins. I'll do 3 bins, I think. And so what do we see? We see, and this actually isn't all that different from the other paper, except we're including the threateningness of COVID. So as time goes on, for Republicans, their probability of getting vaccinated goes down. So they're less and less likely as time goes on. And that makes sense for those of us who lived through COVID. And if you didn't live through COVID and you're watching my videos, congratulations. You are a child genius. But yeah, for Democrats, at least if they found it non-threatening, their intention to vaccinate increased across time. But for those who saw it as moderately threatening, it was flat. And for those who saw it as super threatening, that's weird. The more time went by, the less likely they were to get vaccinated. Again, I don't understand why that would be. If you have an explanation, I would love to hear it. Why would Democrats be less likely to get vaccinated over time if they perceive it as super threatening? You would think it would be the opposite, that the more threatening they saw it, the stronger the relationship. But apparently not. Although that's the sort of thing that would make me double check my data, and I'm not going to do that right now. Because it makes me wonder if there's like something reverse coded here. No, it wouldn't, because we looked at a scatter plot of how threatening it is versus their intentions to vaccinate, and it was positive. So the more threatening they saw it, the more likely they were to get vaccinated. So yeah, I don't know why that's happening. If you have suggestions, let me know. So I did that, and my conscience got the best of me. Because I think it was 2 videos ago, I said, when I was critiquing their paper, I said, I probably shouldn't say this because somebody's going to ding me later. And basically the point that I made is that they have the indicators, the indicator variables. So they had like several different scales. Like I think how threatening they saw COVID was like 6 different items that they asked a bunch of different questions related to how threatening they perceive COVID to be. So like their intentions to vaccinate was like 2 or 3 items asking whether they intended to get vaccinated. So yeah, their indicators were when there is a vaccine for the coronavirus, I will get it. When there is a vaccine for the coronavirus, it should be mandatory. So they aggregated those 2 into one measure. And one of the criticisms I said is that assumes each of these variables have equal weight when they maybe shouldn't have equal weight. So I said in that situation, it's best to do a structural equation model. And so as I was doing my analysis, I was like, you know what? I should probably do a structural equation model because structural equation modeling can handle longitudinal data. They're called growth curve models. So I decided to fit a growth curve model, which was a pain. But hey, I did it for you. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and show you an R. I'm not going to show you every little detail, but I guess what I can do, I can show you what the model looks like. So there's the model that I fit in Levon. And I'm not going to go into details about what a growth curve model is. But long story short, it is a way to account for longitudinal data and measurement data at the same time. So it's going to avoid giving you biased results if you have measurement error, which we have in this situation. So now, if we go here, I'm just going to start by showing the plot that we kind of saw earlier. This one's just a prettier version. So this shows the relationship between COVID vaccination intentions and time by party and by perceived threat of the coronavirus. And so we already saw that before. It's just prettier now. Now let's look at the SEM, and it requires, so SEM has a very different parameterization. In fact, I spent a long time trying to compare the actual estimates from SEM to the estimates from the mixed model, and it's just, you got to do a lot of math, and I didn't feel like doing a lot of math because they're just parameterized differently. So I figured, you know what, it's better just plot it anyway. So all that is just preparing the data to plot, and then now we get the SEM plot, which actually looks really cool. And the most important thing to note is that we see the same thing. So that's comforting to me, that we have two totally different approaches and we come to basically the same conclusions. So we see again across the board, Republicans have a lower intention to vaccinate than Democrats. And we see that as time progresses, Democrats tend to increase their intentions to vaccinate, whereas Republicans tend to decrease over time. And we also see that weird relationship with the threateningness of COVID, that for Democrats, for some reason, the more threatening they perceive it to be, the less likely they are to intend to vaccinate over time. Again, I don't know why. So I think the important point from this plot is that the substantive conclusions reached are the same, regardless of whether we use SEM or mixed models. But I thought, you know what? It would be kind of cool to overlay the two on the same plot. And so that's what this next part does, which was also a pain to do. And we get this plot, and this gets interesting. So the thicker lines are the structure equation model or the growth curve model, whatever you want to call it. And the thinner lines are the mixed models. And in these areas, they're fairly similar, but they're very different in the tails. But they're not different really in their slopes. They're different in their intercepts. So there's definitely a shift downward in the SEM. And I'm not entirely sure why that is. And I would have expected the opposite because we know that if you have measurement error in your model, it tends to weaken slopes. But if you handle the measurement error, then it should strengthen the relationship. But that doesn't say anything about the intercepts, just the slopes. Yeah, and so maybe it's something to do with the measurement error again, but I would have expected things to work a little bit differently. So I don't know why they're different. I do know there was a paper once, so Pat Curran wrote an article titled "Have Multi-Level Models Been Structure Equation Models All Along?" And basically, under certain conditions, you get identical results when you do SEM and mixed models. But that's obviously not the case here. So it could be that the reason why they're not the same is because I didn't do these models. Because actually, this is the first, it's kind of embarrassing. I am a quantitative psychologist. This is supposed to be my forte. This is the first time I've ever fit a growth curve model. So it could be that I did it wrong. Actually, this may be it. In my structure equation model, I included an additional variable in that I didn't include in the other variable, in the mixed model. So maybe that has something to do with it. I don't feel like running the model right now, but maybe I'll run it off camera and then leave a note right here that says whether these change the results. Anyway, long story short, I don't know why the two models are different in their intercepts. But what I do know is that the substantive conclusions are the same. So that's comforting. And also when we consider the original article that I critiqued a couple weeks ago, are my conclusions different? yeah and no. I mean, I still see that same effect that they see, that Republicans were less likely to get vaccinated over time, whereas Democrats weren't. But that was an oversimplification of what was going on if you consider how threatening they perceived COVID vaccines to be. So, that's kind of cool. And why were they different? So again, they used a fixed effect regression model, which couldn't account for mean differences between people or even between Democrats and Republicans. So they had to use a totally different analysis to investigate that. Whereas the models that I fit, you could see it from the plots, and the models themselves actually estimate that. I think probably the biggest difference, though, is that they used an approach where they basically did a bunch of t-tests, or regression models, I guess, looking at the relationship between intentions to vaccinate and a bunch of variables. And they used those variables to figure out which ones to include in their model, and they ended up including age, SES, and political affiliation. I used a different model. I used a random forest model that accounts for the multivariate nature of the data. And earlier I did look at age and I did look at SES, and they weren't really that important of predictors, not nearly as important as how threatening they perceive the coronavirus to be. So yeah, similar conclusions, but the conclusions I reached were certainly quite a bit more nuanced. But still, I'm not going to dog on them because they provided their data and conclusions were similar. So hats off to you, my friends. And hey, I don't have a growth curve modeling class, but I do have a mixed models class. And since the mixed model results were basically the same as the SEM results, that means you should take a class from me. Did you know that I'm doing a live class like in January? It's going to be cool. It's going to be awesome, man. Bring in the new year by learning some mixed models. And I think that's going to be from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So, I hope to see you there. If not, you could always take a self-guided class. I do more than mixed models. I do an intro stats class. I do an R class. I've got a visualization class. And coming up soon, I'm going to have a generalized linear model class. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, hope you've had as much fun as I've had. And yeah, peace out. We'll see you next time. Whoops. Fan. Got a fan to blow on my face so as to reduce the amount of heat that is on said face. I wonder what the thing is that's gonna cancel me. Probably that one time in elementary school I got in a fight. Yeah, this dude was like, "Hey, what you want, Fife? What you want?" And then I punched him in the shoulder. And then he started to cry. And then I said I was sorry. And, I found out that in my life that I tend to fall on the right side of the debate. It's really mean to kindly ask people to be nice. Would that be my downfall? Statistics we must teach. I gave a talk in church once and did a Chewbacca impression. It was really awkward because nobody laughed. Good parents never tell their kids they're an embarrassment. I had good parents. At least they never told me to my face.